Let's be honest, for a long time, digital sustainability has been the very last priority in product development. I even heard people call it a limousine liberal concept. In Google's 2024 DORA report, over 30% of 40,000 professionals ranked environmental concerns as AI's most pressing negative impact. Above its effects on society, questions like, will AI take my job? So I'm putting it out there for your appreciation. Has AI just put our discipline under the spotlight? Kia ora, everyone. My name is Jean-Philippe Ehret, and I'm really happy to be with you today. Let me introduce myself very quickly. I've worked in IT for over 25 years, doing just about every job you can think of. And even after all that time, I love coding. To me, there is something almost artistic about good code. But before IT, my background was in industrial science, specializing in renewable energy. And I guess I've always been drawn into environmental issues. So with that mix of interests, it's no surprise I found my way into IT sustainability and started a company called BetterBytes. For full disclosure, BetterByte is a partner of Resilio, who is sponsoring the event, but don't worry, I have nothing to sell you today, so you can stay seated. I live in New Zealand, in what might be one of the only real hobby houses in the country. Yes, it's grass on the roof, not always practical though. New Zealand is a very beautiful place, but despite of our clean and green reputation and all the renewable sources we have, we're struggling to supply enough electricity for both industries and households. And as a result, we are importing and burning a lot of coal. In New Zealand, as pretty much everywhere around the world, we are experiencing a growing concern. Data centers are consuming green energy capacity. We need to move away from fossil fuels. We also know that AI is one of the reasons why big tech companies postpone their carbon neutrality goals. But to be fair, we also see at some places, like New Zealand, hyperscalers supporting new infrastructure. So renewable capacity takes time to build, right? So are data centers, energy and carbon challenges just a temporary issue? We see mixed signals, and the reality is we don't know. We lack reliable information on AI, especially when it comes to its environmental impact. Most AI firms remain secretive on the matter, and when they do share data, it often relies on questionable methodologies. And given that, it's hard for businesses to factor environmental consideration into their AI strategy. There is, in fact, a real risk that AI's environmental impact could undermine businesses' own sustainability commitment. Scope 3, category 1. So we need data urgently. And today we are going to dive into the key takeaways from the first ever comprehensive assessment of the environmental impact of a leading LLM supplier. And I have to say, I'm truly honored that my team in Europe was involved in peer reviewing this study. So why is it the first of its kind? Well, because it brings together three essential ingredients. First, it covers the entire life cycle of AI delivery, not just the energy used to train the model. Second, it assesses three key environmental factors: carbon emissions, of course, but also water consumption and resource depletion. And most importantly, it's based on first-hand data. The study was commissioned by the LLM supplier itself, and the auditor was given unrestricted access to their data. Now, you might be wondering, who is that brave AI firm we are talking about? And right up to the last minute, I thought I could tell you, but the report hasn't been publicly released yet. It's not OpenAI, and so not GPT-4, but a popular competitor. And I will make sure to share the link to the report on LinkedIn as soon as available. It will also be available on the Green.io website. Now we know that energy consumption increases exponentially with the number of parameters. So in this study, we looked at two models, a small model with 3 billion parameters and a larger model with around 120 billion parameters. In terms of performances, if we take the MMLU benchmark as a reference, the small model scores 61, which is comparable to Llama 3B, and the larger model scores 85, which is comparable to GPT-4o. And our functional unit to compare apples to apples was the total life cycle for each model, from cradle to grave, everything included, even the footprint of computers used by the professionals annotating content during the fine-tuning phase. So the study shows that the larger model has so far caused the release of around 21,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. Again, everything included. And as a point of reference, this is 3 or 4 times less than what we know or we think we know about GPT-4o. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you may think, well, that's not enormous. It is far less than other cloud services like Netflix, for example, which emits around 1.5 billion tons a year. And that was a statistic. That is a statistic from 2021. But on an individual scale, if you ride a bike, for example, or you try to become a vegetarian, you might find this frustrating. If the model ends up being used for trivial purposes, it could feel like the effort of thousands of people was wasted. But of course, your appreciation on this number is personal. Now, one particularly striking insight, though, is electricity use accounts for 86 to 90% of the emissions. And why is it so high? Well, this is because the model was primarily trained in Nevada, where the grid is still highly carbonized. So it's no surprise that the number one recommendation from the audit is to relocate operations in a different region, like Northern Europe, where emissions could be reduced by a factor of 10. Now, what's the part of inference? The study assesses the impact of the AI firm's chatbot and takes into consideration the full life cycle of an inference, including the end user device, let's say a smartphone. For a small conversation of 800 output tokens, emissions are in order of grams, 1.14 for the larger model and 0.16 for the small. This is a very little amount. That's not more than a simple email. So inferences seem clean until you factor in training emissions. If we spread out training emissions over the number of inferences so far, results are quite different, with 37 grams for the larger model and 70 for the small. And the reason why the small model emits more per query is only because it has been used far less than the larger one. Indeed, it takes time for inferences to amortize training. So fingers crossed, all the money thrown into AI startups doesn't end up for training short-lived models. So you may wonder, what is 37 grams of CO2? It's approximately watching an episode of your preferred series on Netflix. So how to reduce the impact of an inference? Well, there are plenty of discussions around the topic. Good prompt engineering can help, but the greenest prompt is the one you don't send. And if it's not essential, don't compute it. Review your UX, trim the fat. Because we all rush into AI or die, we are literally wasting computing power at the moment. Now let's talk about water. So the larger model required so far 314,000 cubic meters of fresh water, and 60% was for cooling the heat from AI computing. That's the equivalent of 3,000 Olympic swimming pools, but is that number big? If we spread this water usage across inferences, then each conversation would use half a liter of fresh water. You may have seen this image before. That's not new. The study just confirms it. Now, I just want to make a quick point on water. Water is scarce, but even more than you may think. I really like this illustration here because it puts things into perspective. Can you spot the bubble representing water available for our consumption? So none of you have chosen this one because this bubble is actually all the water available on Earth, including salted water from the oceans, and also a large portion of fresh water locked in Antarctica or Greenland ice caps. So unless you plan to invade Greenland or Antarctica to set up data centers, of course, this isn't a viable option. But would you think that it's the second bubble here? And most of you would think so. Well, essentially because it's written in the legend, right, on the illustration. But this is not the good one. This is not the right one. It's almost right, but actually even the second bubble is not completely correct because it includes water from swamps, or, for instance, or water not really accessible. What's actually available is closer to this teeny tiny bubble here representing rivers and lakes. Again, the recommendation of the auditor is to relocate operations to regions like Northern Europe, which have more cool and humid climates. Now, let's talk about raw materials. If there is one thing I would like you to take away, is what's coming. The bigger model required so far 750 kilograms of antimony equivalent. So the unit is SBEQ here. This unit for resource depletion here, antimony equivalent, is much like how greenhouse gas are measured in CO2 equivalent, including methane and among other gases. So this doesn't mean AI only needs antimony. It requires actually elements from almost the entire periodic table. And as you can imagine, a large portion, 61%, was needed to manufacture the hardware. We are moving massive amount of dirt to extract a constantly reducing proportion of materials. So for a 400 output token conversation, considering the model's full life cycle, it would require 1.3 milligrams of antimony equivalent. That's the equivalent of that 2 cents coin. And this bag represents 10 conversation, which is my personal daily AI usage. Now, our larger model required 25,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs for training. And as a point of reference, GPT-4 required 60,000 NVIDIA A100 for training. These hardware tend to be used for 5 to 6 years and then replaced. And it is unclear if the competition on AI will accelerate this refresh rate or not. Now, critical minerals power both AI and essential sectors like healthcare and renewable energy infrastructure, for instance. Materials like tin, lead, indium, and many rare earths face economic exhaustions within 10 to 20 years. If we continue down this path, AI as a mass market technology may just have one generation window in human history. Now, not only raw materials eventually run out, but as the McKinsey analysis here points out, we can't supply these materials at the necessary speed, especially rare earth. This predicts a sharply rising cost for computing equipment in general, potentially triggering geopolitical conflicts over these increasingly scarce resources. You probably have a few recent images coming to mind illustrating this point, haven't you? Now let's recap a few takeaways from the study that you can take on board. It's quite obvious, but I prefer to double down on it. Use a smaller or more specialized model if you can. You've noticed during this presentation that the difference between a small and a larger model, the impact is often of two orders of magnitude. The difference in impact is often of two orders of magnitude. So especially for use cases that don't need deep reasoning, long context memory, or complex creativity, let's say headline generation, sentiment analysis, spam detection, to name a few. GreenOps and FinOps teams here should agree on this, no debate. Now, you can also use models trained in regions with lots of renewable, a cool and humid climate. And I'm very confident that the AI firm we are talking about will follow the auditor's advice and will relocate its operations in the future. And I will be more than happy to recommend this company maybe in a couple of weeks. Regarding inference, if the model is open source, which was the case here, run it locally if it's possible, if you have full control on the type of energy supply. And finally, apply software eco-design principles to limit the need of inferences. And I want to end up this presentation with a few personal thoughts that are not coming from the study itself. Even when applying these principles, reducing your information system's environmental footprint isn't guaranteed. We need to consider Jevons paradox here, as AI is in an elastic demand market. Efficiency improvements often accelerate usage. Think about the rapid adoption of DeepSeek. An energy-efficient LLM may also stimulate new behaviors and economic shifts that increase digital consumption, new products, new services. So ultimately, this isn't just about using AI frugally. It's about choosing which future we accelerate towards. Will we optimize the problems of yesterday, like improving fossil fuel discoveries? Or will we create the solutions of tomorrow? I believe that our goal for all of us is to use AI for a net positive outcome. So the power of AI rests in our hands. Thank you very much.